Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 76. What It Takes to Be a Hero. The explosions continued to ring out as Izuku found the source in the shopping district. It was the Sludge villain? But All Might had just... His veins turned to ice as he thought back to the conversation on the rooftop. He didn't remember anything sticking out of All Might's pockets. He must have dropped the bottles. Frick, this was his fault. Another explosion went off, and as Izuku looked closer, he realized that was Kacchan. The slime guy had taken over his body just like he tried to do with Izuku. There were heroes everywhere trying to take him down, but they gave up quickly when they realized their quirks were incompatible. Were they just going to leave him? Focus on limiting collateral? Izuku's nose and throat still stung from the sludge. Kacchan couldn't breathe like that. He knew that quite intimately. He wasn't going to last long enough for backup to arrive. Izuku's legs were moving again before he had the chance to think about how stupid this was. He ducked under the police tape and sent his bag hurtling into the villain's eye. He flinched and yelped in pain, giving Kacchan a split second to breathe. By the time Izuku was at his side, he could tell that Kacchan was beginning to lose consciousness. His eyes were starting to unfocus. He clawed the goop around his nose away, enough for him to get another breath in and let his eyes become more alert. When he managed to make eye contact with Izuku, he wrenched his hand up and pointed his palm above his head directly at the sludge guy's eyes. "Kacchan, fire now!" he shouted. The explosion left him dazed. His ears were ringing, and it took him a second to find his bearings again. He was holding on to Kacchan, who was leaning on him and gasping in heaving breaths. The heroes were closing in. Oh, frick. The heroes were closing in. Kacchan pushed him away, and he took that as a cue to run. So run he did. He bolted out of the wreckage and away from the scene, thankfully having enough sense to grab his bag before it was too late. He was so busy looking over his shoulder that he almost ran straight into someone. Dodging out of the way, at the last second, he rolled on the ground and back to his feet as quickly as he could. He was going to call an apology over his shoulder and keep running, but then he saw who it was. All Might. He was calling for him to wait, and a large part of him wanted to ignore it, but he was frozen in place by the part of him that still looked up to him, that still saw him as an authority figure to be respected and obeyed. All of him was tired, though. Tired enough to give up. Tired enough to take whatever he had to say. "Young man, I wanted to apologize," he started. "What?" Izuku stood there dumbstruck and shaking as he kept glancing back to the scene where reporters were starting to try and shove cameras and microphones into Kacchan's face. "Not a fan of publicity?" All Might asked. It was all he could do to shake his head. His whole body was screaming at him to run. He couldn't be seen here, and he hoped to heaven his stunt wasn't caught on camera. "Come on, then. Let's get out of here," All Might offered, and started walking in the direction Izuku had just been running in. "I wanted to talk with you, if that's all right." The prey animal at his core wanted to say no and wanted to gun it and leave All Might in the dust. But he knew he wasn't going to outrun All Might. Not even like this. If All Might really wanted to talk to him, it would be better to not make him angry first. Yeah, okay," he relented as the two of them fell into stride. They walked a few blocks away before All Might spoke. "I was wrong to say what I said to you on the roof," he began. "There are stories about every hero, how they became great, and most have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think, almost on their own. And today, that's what happened to you. Young man, you too can become a hero." This was too much emotional whiplash for one day. He felt like he was going to pass out. No one had ever told him he could be a hero. At least no one who knew what he really was. Not even his own mother. But now Of all people, All Might himself was telling him that he could? He stopped in his tracks, but All Might kept walking for a few strides before he realized Izuku had stopped. Once he did, he turned around to look at him. You have the heart of a hero, my boy. I deem you worthy of my power. My quirk is yours to inherit, All Might declared. What the hell, 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 what the hell? You should see your face right now. Don't worry. I'm not going to force this thing on you, he said as he walked back over to Izuku. Listen well, young man. This is your choice. Do you want to accept my awesome power or not? He asked with a little too much enthusiasm because blood started pouring out of his mouth again. For the second time today, Izuku let out a nonsensical string of consonants in response to All Might speaking to him. What the hell was happening? There are a couple of things you should know about my abilities. Journalists always guess my quirk is super strength or some kind of invulnerability. People ask in interviews, and I always make a joke and dodge the question. It's because the world needs to believe that the symbol of peace is a natural-born hero. But I'm not. There's nothing natural about my ability. I wasn't born with this power. It's a sacred torch that was passed on to me from someone else. Wait. Hold on. This is a lot to process. It's true that there's a lot of debate as to what your quirk actually is. Nobody's ever figured it out. It's one of the world's greatest mysteries. People are constantly talking about it online, but the idea of passing on a quirk or inheriting it doesn't make any sense. I've never heard anything like that before. Powers are supposed to be unique to each individual. I mean, since the first superpowers, no one's just been able to give someone else their power like a present. That's just crazy. If this was true, it would cause us to rethink everything we know about quirks to begin with. Stop nerding out. All Might cut off the mumbling he hadn't realized he was doing. You'll have to adjust your reality and accept this new truth. I can transfer my quirk to someone else, and that's just one facet of my secret abilities. The true name of my power is One for All. One person improves the power, then hands it off to another person. It continues to grow as it's passed along. It is this cultivated power that allows me to save those who are in need of a hero, the truth behind my strength. Why the hell would you give it to me? He sputtered out inelegantly. I was on a long hunt for a worthy successor, and then I watched you jump into action as the rest of us stood idly by. You may be quirkless, but you saved that boy. You were a hero, All Might answered like it was the most obvious thing in the world. This was too much. This was all too much. This was too much. Distantly, he felt the concrete collide with his kneecaps. It hurt. He did his best to hold on to that pain because it was the only damn thing that made sense right now. His vision was blurring. Was he crying? Yeah, he was crying. That made sense, too. He was on the ground. He was in pain, and he was crying. That made sense. All Might was standing in front of him, looking awfully concerned. That didn't make sense. Kid, calm down. Cool it with the waterworks. All Might tried to soothe as he gently patted Izuku's shoulder. He was having a damn episode in front of All Might. He needed to pull it together. He quickly wiped his eyes and did his best to corral his emotions. He had stopped crying, but he was still at a complete loss for words. Thankfully, All Might gave him an out. You don't have to decide right now, my boy. Why don't you think on it? He offered. Yeah, thank you. I don't know how I'm supposed to let you know when I make my decision. He finally found the words to ask. All Might thought for a moment before speaking. Well, I've told you secrets far more pressing than my phone number, so let's go with that, he said cheerfully. Izuku huffed out a weak laugh at that and nodded before fishing out a piece of paper for him to scrawl the digits on. His civilian phone had run out of battery ages ago, and since the Shinsos were the only people he ever used it to talk to, there hadn't been a need for him to keep charging it. All Might passed back his notebook, and Izuku committed the numbers to memory before stuffing it back in his bag. "You get home safe, young man," All Might instructed him, hesitating for a moment and giving Izuku one last shoulder pat before taking his leave. Izuku walked home in a daze. His brain felt like jello, and thoughts swam through it sluggishly. This had to be a joke, right? A dream? There's no way that just happened. There's just no way. But it felt real. His head still ached and his throat still burned from the first Sludge villain encounter, so that had to be real, right? How hard did he hit his head? He went through the process of checking himself for a concussion. He did his best to walk in a straight line along the curb, and it was notably more difficult than it should have been, but he wasn't tripping over himself. Probably a mild concussion. That wasn't enough to explain all of what just happened away. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement by the time Izuku made it back to the brewery. When he got back to his office, he flicked on the lights and pulled out his notebook, and sure enough, All Might's phone number was scrawled onto a blank page right after a spread of 2 pages displaying an autograph. When did he do that? Izuku could probably sell that for a pretty penny, but then he'd have to rip the pages out. Would anyone want 2 disconnected pages with All Might's autograph on it? Whatever, that was an issue for another time. Right now, there was a matter far more pressing, and that was the fact that all of that really just happened. There was physical proof in the form of 10 digits inked on a blank page. Izuku sat there staring at the page, only just convincing himself to trust his memory as the last of the sun's light disappeared from the windows. He needed to get ready for patrol. He was due to meet a racer in an hour. Quickly, he sent a text with a random meeting location, and he shook his head in a sad attempt to clear his mind, but it only made his brain throb. Ignoring the pain, he stripped off his school uniform, peeling the right shoulder of his Gakuren off of angry red flesh beneath it. Ow, 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 freak. He forgot about that. The shoulder of his jacket was a hard sheet of melted polyester that cracked and flaked off as it flexed, and his shoulder had a vaguely hand-shaped patch of blistering. He didn't have the energy to feel any sort of way about it. He just went through the motions of cleaning it, applying burn cream, and taping gauze over the top before he slid on a shirt and his ivy hoodie. What was he supposed to say? Should he say yes? Should he take the quirk? It would be stupid not to, right? This was a miracle opportunity. He should jump at it. Why was he even contemplating otherwise? He smeared shadow around his eyes and checked it in his shattered mirror before he left. He could have a quirk. He shut the door behind himself and locked it with a key he found in one of the desk drawers. He wouldn't be quirkless anymore. They ducked around the garage door and stepped out into the rapidly cooling night air. They could be normal. They took off running, each step sending a jolt of pain through their head. This was what they always wanted, wasn't it? End of chapter.